Okay, good afternoon, and you're very welcome to our webinar here today on financial support to weather the crisis. You're all here today knowing that we're in the middle of a crisis, unfortunately. Certainly unprecedented times, and margin overfeeds are at rock bottom. So look, the purpose of the webinar today, we have a great panel lined up. The purpose of the webinar today is to try and see what we can do in terms of financial support to you, the farmers. It's going to be a combination of supports that'll help us weather this crisis. It'll be supports from ourselves in Teagasc, from the mills who've been supporting you over the last 7 or 8 months while things have taken a downturn. Likewise, the banks who've been engaging with you over that period of time as well, and hopefully soon to come, maybe some form of government support as well. So we'll see what the next week or so has to do on that front. We have a panel of speakers lined up today, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So we have Gerard McCutcheon and Michael McKeon from Teagasc, who will give the first couple of presentations. We'll follow that then with Sean Farrell from the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, who'll talk to us about SBCI funding, availability. And then Anne Marie Butler, formerly of Ulster Bank and now Head of Education in Teagasc, is going to talk about preparing to meet your bank manager and what you need to do there. And then as we get to the Q&A, we have Donal Whelton from AIB and Pat Byrnes from Bank of Ireland, who will come in and talk shortly and briefly about what their own banking situation is and what's on offer from their banks. And then we'll get to the Q&A. So you can put your Q&As or your questions through the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Gerard McCutcheon, Teagasc Specialist Pig Advisor based in Oak Park in Carlow. And Gerard is going to kind of set the scene for us and look at monitoring profitability and losses over recent years. Okay, Gerard, thanks.
Good afternoon and thank you. The title of my presentation today is Setting the Scene. And really what I'd like to show you in this presentation is just how feed costs and pig prices have been faring over the years. Teagasc has been compiling the feed costs and pig prices since the mid-1980s, and let's say what I'm going to do is just present the trends that have been shown there, let's say in light of the current crisis. So next slide, Michael. Sorry. If we look at this slide, you can see that what we look at is the cost of each diet, and then we've superimposed the average performance from the profit monitor. And let's say you can see in 2020 the pigs per sow is 27.5 pigs produced per sow, and the various feed conversions then are factored in as well. And when we look at that, we get a cost of feed per kilo deadweight. So you can see that the feed cost, let's say from September onwards, has been rising quite dramatically up to the current feed cost of 1.33 cent per kilo deadweight. The net price being paid, let's say, has dropped from let's say September backwards, and now we're at 1.43 cent per kilo deadweight. So the margin over feed there is 10 cent per kilo deadweight. And that really, let's say, the margin over feed is the amount of money left to pay for the non-feed costs. And we'll look at the non-feed costs and the breakdown of those in subsequent slides. If we look at the margin over feed over the years, and we look at the years 1998 up to 2021, Michael, next slide, we can see that if we look at the top line here, the pink bar is the price paid per kilo deadweight. All of this is in cent per kilo. The middle bar is your feed cost in cent per kilo, and then the bottom bar is the margin over feed. And if we just look at the first year, 1998, the price paid for feed was 81 cent. The price paid per kilo was 114 cent per kilo deadweight, which left a margin over feed of 33 cent. 1999 is the worst year you can see in the whole 24-year period there. 1999 is the worst year there. And the margin over feed there was, even though feed prices dropped to 76 cent, the pig price was 102, leaving a margin over feed cent of 22 cent per kilo deadweight. So let's say most people who were involved in pig production will remember 1999 as a very bad year. But the overall trend, if you took the 24 years together, the overall trend is for a margin over feed of 46.7 cent per kilo. Okay, next slide, Michael, please. If we look at this on a sort of a block basis of 5 years, each block here, and the last one is 4 years, the margin over feed, let's say from 98 to 2002 is 45 cent. From 2003 to 2007, the margin over feed is 51 cent. Then 2008 to 2012, your margin over feed is 44 cent. And 47 cent, let's say from 2013 to 2017. So those 5 year blocks, let's say you can see very consistent. And then 2018 to 2021, the margin over feed for the 4 year period was 49 cent. And that's including the very good year of 2020, where the margin over feed was 66 cent. But if we, just factor in that, remember that the margin over feed is the allowance there to cover the non-feed costs. We have to look at, well, what do we need in terms of a non-feed cost? What are the non-feed costs associated with pig production? Again, let's say the current crisis, and this is why, let's say we're having a conversation today. The sale price here is 142 cent. The feed price cost is 135. Now, these are the current, if we took February or thereabouts, the feed cost is 135 and the margin over feed is 7 cent. In reality, let's say if we took the January figures, it would be 143. The feed is 133. So the margin over feed is 10 cent. And really, from all of what we've seen, we need at least 47 cent to cover our non-feed costs. And if we have an 88 kilo carcass, then our 40 cent, if we take the 7 cent drop, or really, let's say the 40 cent drop there is 35 euros of a loss per pig. And I suppose the point here is that we're hearing figures of how much are we losing per pig. The reality is that we're losing in the region of 33 to 40 euros per pig sold, for every pig being sold at present from pig farms. So it is a serious crisis. This slide really is looking at the non-feed costs. And let's say if we just look at the main ones, labor and management is 15.9 cent, healthcare is 6.6, heat, power and light is 4.3. We know quite well that in current circumstances, heat, power and light is going to increase quite dramatically. Transport is also going to increase because of the increases that we're seeing in fuel costs at the moment. But when we work our way down through all of these costs, the top three are our main costs. We find that the cost is 40.9 cent, which doesn't include the cost of interest and building depreciation, or the building cost for your farm. And if we allow a very modest 6 cent there, we're up at a total cost of 47 cent per kilo deadweight. So that's really the margin that we've seen over 24 years really is covering the cost of production. There's very little profit return on the system. Okay, next slide. Just in terms of improved output, because all of the improved output is factored into the cost of feed. The pigs per sow is 21.5 in the year 2000 and selling pigs at 68.1 kilos deadweight. In 2010, that figure rose to 23.9 pigs sold per sow. The sale weight then is rising by about 1 kilo deadweight per year, up to 78.9 kilos. And if you took that overall increase in meat per sow, it's an increase of 28%. Then in 2020, the output per sow is 27.5 pigs per sow. The slaughter weight is over 88 kilos deadweight. Again, we're seeing that 1 kilo rise in deadweight per year. And the output is an increase relative to the year 2000 of 65%. So you can see performance on farms is improving and is increasing all of the time. Okay, next slide, Michael. In terms of the sale weights, we've gone from 90, on a live weight basis, we've gone from 90.1 kilos sold in the year 2000 up to over 115 kilos in 2020. The average daily gain figure from weaning to sale has risen from 585 grams up to 668 in 2010 and 735 in 2020. So a very round figure of 150 grams of a rise over the 21-year period. This figure is quite stark and impressive. The kilos of feed used per kilo of carcass was 3.66 in the year 2000. It rose slightly in the year 2010 to 3.69. But let's say with improved management and genetics, this has dropped to 3.5 kilos of feed required to put on 1 kilo of pig meat in the year 2020. So there have been great improvements on farms through these years. And really the point, let's say, in terms of setting the scene here, the margin over feed is critical. The current margin over feed, let's say at 10 cent or let's say or lower on farms isn't sustainable or viable for farms if it continues over a long period of time. So that's it. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad if you put them through the Q&A. Apologies about the delay and the technical difficulties there.
No problem. Thanks, Ger. Some very interesting information and stats in that presentation there. So yeah, we're going to move on now on to Michael McKeon. Michael hopefully will share the screen without any glitches. And he's going to talk to us about current costs and cash flows.
Yep. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Just give me 1 second now. Are you able to see the first slide there?
Yeah.
So I'm starting, so Gerard set the scene there of margin over feed over the last number of years. I'm now going to look at the current situation and look forward the next couple of months as to what that means from a cash flow point of view for an average sow unit. So we look at, we did this in December, but a number of things have changed since December in the outlook, and that's why it needs to be, we're looking to do an update on it. So the three main things that have changed is on the feed ingredient side. There's upward pressure from feed ingredients to three main reasons. One is the drought in South America has affected the soybean harvest. You're seeing that there with the soybean prices rising up to 520 euros a ton, with the soya oil prices going from 900 euros up to 1400 euros a ton, and also with maize. After the soybean harvest has been harvested, the second crop in like Brazil will be planted, which will be maize, and that's going to be very critical to see what the global supplies of maize will be going forward. The other thing, unfortunately, is the winter wheat in the US. There is the rating on it so far isn't great. Now it's very early in the season, but there's a rating there in the 40s there at the moment for the winter wheat, and that's again due to drought. As I said, it's very early in the season, so hopefully if they do get rain, that will help to improve the situation on that side of things. So all of these are putting upward pressure on feed ingredients. And then the last thing, which we didn't need, was the Ukrainian situation. And Ukraine is very important because they're the fifth largest exporter of wheat and the second largest exporter of maize. So they have a huge effect on the world supply. So if there's any disruption with that, it's going to obviously increase fluctuations. Hopefully the news there in the last day or two seems to be improving. So hopefully it will come true. Energy costs, there's also upward pressure on energy costs. We're all seeing that at the moment. The electrical cost has nearly doubled. It's where people were at 15 or 18 cents a kilowatt, it's up to 30, 32 cents a kilowatt now in some cases. The same with transport costs. That's also included upward pressure. Another issue there with some of the energy suppliers was that there was contracts there for pig producers out into 2023. But due to force majeure, some of these contracts have been cancelled. So people are immediately there on a higher rate, whereas we would have thought that would have come slowly in over the last 12 to 18 months. And last but not least is the pig price. The trend in December was for the pig price to rise as the year went on. That's still the trend. The reduction in the sow herd in Europe will result in a tightening of the supply of pig meat in Europe. And that's starting to start there at the moment. But we needed the Chinese to come in as well at the same time to increase their level of imports of the EU pig meat. that is still forecast to come in, but it might be a little bit slower. It might be more into the end of the second quarter, into the third quarter before we get that as well. The slaughterings there in the last quarter of 2021 were still very high in China. It was the highest since they had their destock back in 2019. So there's still a big volume of pigs being slaughtered in China, but it is falling. So we just need that process to speed up a bit, I suppose, to really improve the pig price here. So these are the three main reasons. In the presentation here, I've gone through in more data on each of these. So the presentation will be up online after, and you can read them. Due to the time constraints this morning or this afternoon, we're not going to go through them in depth. But what I wanted to look at is, what do these changes mean to a cash flow situation and the cost of production there at the moment? The price for feed. This is the amount of feed that's used every month. This is the total cost of that, and that is the feed cost then on a cent per kilo basis of 136. Again, non-feed cost there, you can see 64,000 euros a month, and that's including the hike in energy cost there, which have gone up by 5 cents a kilo. Overall, you can see the amount of pig meat which is produced every month, at the pig price there at the moment, and the total income. And here is the main figure, is that there's a loss there for an average size unit in Ireland of 56,000 a month at the moment. So the month of February, by the end of this month, is going to be a loss of 56,000 for one single month. If you look at the cumulative loss just from January and February, it's up to 107,000 there. You can see just for the 2 months of January and February. Unfortunately, due to the upward pressure in feed ingredients, it looks as if the composite feed price is going to increase in April. And the indication from the industry is it'll go up by 30 euros a tonne. Now, this is making a very bad situation absolutely critical at that stage. When we look at this in the cash flow point of view for an average size unit, as I said, this is the composite price. You can see they're rising from 393 to 423. You can see the total feed cost there has risen by over 12,000 euros for this month alone in April. And while there may be a slight improvement in the pig price by April, which you're hoping for, the deficit for April alone is nearly 64,000. And if you look for the first 4 months of the year, then it's 227,000 for the first 4 months of 2022 alone. The year improves from a pig price point of view, and we forecast the feed ingredient prices will fall back in the harvest, but they're not going to fall back by as much as they rose in January and April. We reckon they'll fall back by 40 euros a tonne. If this is the situation, then by December, if we take the month of December, we can see here that feed prices have fallen back to 383. Pig price has risen as the year went on to 178, and we're nearly back in a break-even situation. But the big issue here is the loss. It's a loss of nearly 450,000 for an average size unit in the country, which is unprecedented. It's absolutely massive. So this is a serious loss to the whole sector. You know, it's unsustainable for the whole sector. If we look at the average there, we can see the average loss per month there is 37,000. And that's the reason it's a little bit lower then is in the second half of the year, as the pig price rose, the losses are declining, but it's still in a loss making of 7,500 by the end of the year. When we look at this on a national figure, if we take the average loss there we showed from January until December was a loss of 750 euros a sow. If we take the national sow herd of 145,000, the producer loss alone is 109 million from January 2022 until the end of this year. 109 million for one small sector with about 300 farms. But the issue as well is that this isn't the peak loss. The peak loss really happened last September when the feed ingredient prices started to rise. And if you took a 12-month period as the main loss making in this, you're looking from September of 2021 to August of 2022. So if we look at the forecast that we have for 2022 there, as we've shown, this will show a loss then of 880 euros for each sow. National herd size again 145,000, and it's a total loss of 128 million there for a sector. Now, this is obviously the pig sector there is €1 billion industry, but even still, a loss of 128 million is a massive, massive amount of loss for a small number of producers. So from a pig producer's point of view, what can you do? First of all, if you're calculating your loss, you're looking at the profit monitor report that we do in Teagasc that will give you an in-depth analysis of your loss, and it'll quantify your loss each quarter. We can use that then for your cash flows, and we can estimate for your own farm and your own unit exactly how much you're going to lose, depending on your size of your farm and depending on the input costs which you have, which may be higher or lower. And then if you want as well, we have done a ready reckoner, the Teagasc ready reckoner, that you can also use. And this basically, just with the fluctuations we have between feed prices at the moment, between the pig price as the year goes on, if you just want to get a ready reckoner there and immediate on a month-to-month basis, we can use this. And it's free to all the Irish pig producers there to be on the site in a number of days, or you can get it from your advisor. And it's simply something that you can do yourself. Any of the green boxes are the boxes that you fill in. So you can put in your feed price per ton for each of the feeds that you use. You can also put in then the key efficiencies for your unit, the pigs produced, the creep feed used, the weaning weight, the transfer weight, feed conversions. Once you have that in, it'll calculate your feed usage cost, and it'll calculate then your feed cost on a kilo dead weight. It'll then give you a summary of your feed cost, your margin, your non-feed cost that you have to import. So your total cost of production for the unit here is break even was 188 cents a kilo, and the loss here in this particular situation was 46 cents for every kilo of meat produced, or nearly 42 euros for every pig produced there at the moment. So this is available to all of the pig producers out there at the moment. It'll be online there, and you can download it yourselves or just speak to your advisor. But as I said, the next 12 months is just it's unprecedented situation. We've been keeping records for the last 30 years, and this is by far the biggest dip we have ever had in the sector, and it's absolutely critical. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Michael. There's some stark realities there, unfortunately, for us. We'll move on now to Sean Farleshon from the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, formerly Bank of Ireland, and Sean is going to give us a presentation there on SBCI funding, and there's various aspects to that. So he'll give us an overview on SBCI and the types of funding and what you need to do. Okay, thanks, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Can I just check that you can see my screen before I start?
Yeah. And just before you start, I might remind people you can put your questions in through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen there. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, thanks, Kieran, and good afternoon to everybody. I have a number of slides that I talk through, but maybe just at the outset, because not everybody in the call might be familiar with the SBCI and what we do. So we're Ireland's national promotional institution. We act by providing wholesale funding and guarantees to on-lenders. We don't lend directly ourselves, and we operate through banks and non-bank lenders to provide funding through to SMEs and to farmers. So that's the context that I'll give around this. We're a public sector agency, part of the National Treasury Management Agency, under the aegis of the Department of Finance. So we have some experience in providing schemes specifically to the agri sector, and we have a number of schemes in the market currently which we think can be helpful for pig farmers who are impacted by some of the challenges that have been outlined by both Michael and Gerard. So hopefully the technology works for me, and if you're not seeing a slide changing, Kieran, you can jump in a second, but hopefully this will come up. On the screen currently, I put up the three main supports that we are making available in the SBCI. I'm going to talk about two in particular today, one being the COVID-19 Credit Guarantee Scheme, and the second being the Brexit Impact Loan Scheme. And some of you on this call may also be familiar with the Future Growth Loan Scheme, which we launched back in 2019, and which is particularly successful in terms of funding long-term investment, and I'm sure some people on this call have access funding through that. There's very limited capacity available through the Future Growth Loan Scheme currently, So in terms of supporting pig farmers impacted by the current crisis, we think that the COVID-19 credit guarantee scheme or the Brexit scheme are more appropriate to do that. So at a high level, just talking through the COVID-19 credit guarantee scheme, this scheme was brought into play with the support of the Department of Enterprise and the Department of Agriculture, and it was brought into play because of COVID-19 and under the rules of the temporary state aid framework that was brought in by the European Commission. So there's a degree of complication to this scheme, which is outside of the control of the SBCI or even outside of the control of Ireland because of the rules that the Commission have put around it. However, it can be and is being used to support pig farmers who are impacted by the current crisis. It provides for loan facilities from €10,000 up to €1 million, and for loan terms from between 3 months to 5.5 years. The interest rates on this vary depending on the provider, and I'll show the list of providers that offer this scheme. But interest rates less than 3% are available through the scheme. And a unique feature of this scheme, which isn't relevant to the Brexit scheme I'll talk about in a moment, is that there's a guarantee premium which needs to be paid, and that's a factor of the rules around the EU Commission temporary state aid framework. And that guarantee premium varies depending on the length of the loan. And your bank, if you're talking to them about this scheme, will talk you through that. As is a feature of most of the loan schemes which SBCI puts together, any loans up to a level, in this case €250,000, are available without the provision of security. So if there's a loan below that amount being sought, then security isn't required. And there's also an ability to refinance a certain level of COVID-related expenses that might have been initially funded through an overdraft or a short-term stocking loan available through this as well, which I'm not sure will be particularly relevant to this audience, but it is a feature of it. And as the temporary state aid framework is set to expire in June of this year, then our expectation is that this scheme will also end in this June. Now, there have been forecast end dates for this scheme before, and because of the persistence of COVID across Europe, it has been extended. Our view at this stage, based on the information that we have currently, is that we're not expecting it to be extended beyond June. That may change, but that's our view currently. In terms of who can apply, well, it's SMEs, mid-caps and farmers that meet the eligibility criteria and expect to have a reduction of 15% in turnover profitability as a result of COVID. And the interpretation of COVID can be quite broad. So we know that as farmers, the impact of COVID can be at a secondary level. So it could be because of your processor or your supplier. And therefore, it's not just a direct impact, but it can be an indirect impact that's taken into account. And that's the same for the Brexit scheme. And I'm sure Donal and Pat will speak about that when they talk about those schemes as well and how they're used through their banks. It can be used for working capital or investment, and it can be used, as I said earlier, to refinance short-term debt as a result of COVID-19. The loan amounts, and these are also governed by this temporary state aid framework, can't be more than €1 million, and it can be a maximum of either double your annual wage turnover for 2019 or your most recent year, as is more appropriate to you, or 25% of your total turnover of 2019 or your most recent year, 2021. In this instance, and again, that's their rules that are brought in because of the framework. This moves forward from me. In terms of how you apply for this scheme, the providers listed on the slide have availability under the COVID-19 credit guarantee scheme. So in terms of banks, AIB, Bank of Ireland, Ulster Bank, a host of non-bank providers as well, and credit unions that have a wide geographical spread. So unlike other schemes where you would come firstly to the SBCI and then go to your bank, in this case, if you're looking to access the COVID credit guarantee scheme, you go directly to the bank, they complete the paperwork with you and provide the funding. And in return for that, then they can rely on the guarantee from the state, which the SBCI administers. So that's one potential option. And I know some pig farmers are getting support through that scheme. Another scheme, which we developed throughout the course of 2021, and which we think has particular application for this particular crisis, is the Brexit Impact Loan Scheme. Brexit, as we know, hasn't gone away. Some would say the real impact of Brexit is yet to be felt. and that COVID has masked some of the impact of Brexit. And the SBCI launched a specific Brexit loan scheme back in 2018, and that was refreshed in 2019 with further support from, in 2021 with further support from Europe. So there's some changes made to it to make it more applicable. And one of the big changes that makes it relevant to this audience is that it's now available to farmers, whereas the old Brexit scheme wasn't. It provides for loans to eligible businesses, farmers and fishers who are Brexit impacted. I'll talk about Brexit impact in a minute, and gives access to working capital finance to enable them to invest in the business. The purposes are for both working capital and investment. And you have to say that you are impacted by Brexit, and that's a self-declaration. And I'll talk about how you may be impacted by Brexit on a primary or a secondary basis in a minute. It does provide for up to 100% refinance if you had an existing Brexit loan. Don't think that's going to be particularly eligible to most on this call. And you can refinance up to 30% of your loan, or use up to 30% of your loan for refinancing other existing facilities. So if, for example, somebody was looking for a €100,000 loan, up to €30,000 of that could involve a refinance of an existing bank loan into the new loan. In terms of features, what it can be used for, the loans here are €25,000 to 1.5 million per applicant. Loan terms from 1 to 6 years. In this case, all lending up to $500,000 are unsecured. The interest rates on this are capped. So for any loans up to €250,000 is a maximum rate of 3.7%, and above that, maximum rate of 2.75%. There's no guarantee premium applying here as there was in the last scheme that I showed you. And we do know that interest rates less than 3% are available for loans under €250,000 in the marketplace. As things stand right now, loans through this scheme are again available up until the end of June, but we do think that it will be extended in this case until the end of this year. So the framework around this and the state aid rules are different to the previous scheme that I showed you. So in terms of, before I get on to who can apply, this is available through 5 credit unions, but also available through AIB, Bank of Ireland, and also Permanent TSB, who have an allocation under the Brexit loan scheme. Applications are different for this scheme than for the credit guarantee scheme. So again, it's about viable micro SMEs, small mid caps, including farmers and fishers, that meet Brexit eligibility criteria. And just to speak about that for a moment, that means that you anticipate or have currently at least 15% of your turnover or profit impacted by Brexit. So either you or somebody that you're trading with is trading with the UK to reflect 15% of your turnover on Brexit. When we look at our pig meat exports to the UK and look at the level of imports that we have from the UK, they can be aggregated, and we found that the vast majority of pig farmers can qualify through that Brexit impact criteria. How to go about applying for it, and conscious of time, I'll try and conclude pretty quickly. Anybody that wants to apply for a loan under the Brexit scheme comes first of all to the SBCI website. You fill out a basic application form on our website, which looks like this, which calls out the eligibility criteria. And there are 4 listed here. The one that most are taken is that one on the bottom, so that the business is indirectly exposed to the UK by way of dealing with either a processor or a supplier. And then you return that form to us in the SBCI, and we issue with an eligibility code, typically about 48 hours after we get the application form to us. You then bring that code through to one of the providers that I'm after calling out, who offers the scheme, and they then complete an application on your behalf. I do think it's important to say that we provide an 80% guarantee for all the lending. We do rely on the banks to participate in this to underwrite and credit approve the loans. They retain 20% of all the risk in any of these loan schemes. So while obviously there's an understanding that there's major cash flow deficits, as Michael has called out on the previous presentation, the ability to repay on average over a period of time, taking the troughs and the peaks of the commodity price cycles into account, are part of that credit assessment. And I'm sure Pat and Donal will speak to that in greater detail. But I just wanted to point out that while there is a guarantee in place, the banks do credit approve the facilities. So that's it from me, Kieran. Happy to take any questions, and hopefully these supports will be of benefit to farmers who are impacted by the current crisis.
Thanks very much, Sean. Really appreciate that. Yeah, some very useful information, just outlining the whole method and mechanisms for funding there through SBCI, and we'll get to that in the Q&A again there at the end. Our final presentation for this afternoon is from Anne Marie Butler. As I mentioned, Anne Marie is now Head of Education in Teagasc, formerly Ulster Bank, and Anne Marie is going to talk to us about preparing to meet the bank. Okay, Anne Marie, thank you.
Thanks very much, Kieran, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose it's very sobering to listen to what's gone before, particularly from Michael and the data. So I suppose just before I run into the slides, a couple of quick ones. Certainly, I would say to everyone as I go through this, and as you're listening to Sean, and everybody understands and looks after their own mental health, because certainly this is a challenging time for all, and people need to look after each other in that. Just a couple of quick ones from my experience in banking for a long number of years. The questions that the bank are looking for and looking to answer are the questions that you yourself obviously are looking at and know the detail, and it would have come up there on the Ready Reckoner and your PIGSIS. But what the bank want to see, or your finance provider, what is your break-even price? Okay, so at which point are you covering all your costs? What are your total feed costs and your total non-feed costs? And for the vast majority of producers, that information is very much to hand. It's on your PIGSIS, it's on your Ready Reckoner, but please don't underestimate the importance of that data for a bank or a financial institution. What they want to see is look at which point, when the world readies itself and steadies, at which point are you back on an even keel and you're back making money, or at least back in a break-even position. And really what the bank want to understand is what is the cause of the financial pressure. So obviously this is a very unprecedented time. There's the perfect storm there in the mix of all the items that Michael detailed. But what the bank want to understand is this what is causing your problem? So it's not something outside of the farm. It's not a personal debt. What is causing the problem here, and how can it be, I suppose, assisted in the short term and solved in the longer term? So they're the same kind of questions that you'll be looking at when you're looking at your data. Okay, so look, it's in chatting to the financial institution, as I said, it's having that open and honest conversation. So it's really just bringing in the kind of detail that's been discussed. The existing debt, obviously feed creditors, who's owed what kind of timelines are we within or without, the non-feed creditors, all the bits and pieces that are in the PIGSIS. Many are now trading as a company, so obviously wages are coming out of that company. But if it's not a company, what are the living expenses? Like, what is it costing to keep obviously families going and keep the show on the road? I can't emphasize enough the accurate cash flow. It's absolutely essential that there's an accurate cash flow there, and even for the next 6 to 12 months, and we see after that. But really it's laying out in the black and white of what is coming in, what's going out, what are the costs, and how much is needed to keep that show on the road, bearing in mind the timelines that Michael mentioned earlier and how long this will travel on for. And I think it would be awful remiss of me not to say that in all my years of banking with Ulster Bank, which was over 14, I know Michael mentioned 30 years of data, it is an extremely challenging time. So people do need to seek support, be it financial or even somebody to bounce their ideas off. Ultimately, what a bank or financial institution need to understand is how we'll demonstrate repayment capacity. So how much, what is needed, and can you afford to pay that back, as I said, when we come back to some level of normality. So planning is crucial. The financial products, all I would say to people is to explore all the options. Sean, to be fair, has given a really good insight into some of the newer loans that are there that were not there 2, 3, 4 years ago. And from my experience, I found people often, the title of it might put them off because they'd say, God, that doesn't apply, like the COVID-19 credit guarantee scheme. But those options, they may not be available to everybody, but it's certainly worth a conversation. The other things that can be done, it can be interest only on existing debt. Like, to be fair, from my experience over the years, pig farmers have always been really strong at paying back debt quicker. So it's looking at what you're paying back. For many people have used cash on their farm in 2019, 2020 to build farming houses, fattening spaces. If that's been spent from cash, that is a conversation you can have with the bank or the institution to see, can that be then put onto a loan? So a 10-year loan, for example, rather than what you've spent from your own cash flow. Do look at the term and the rate of interest. And what the bank will want to see is, what the money's been used for. So unfortunately, it's not always the case that, feed bills, for example, can be put over very long terms. That's just not really the nature of what they're designed for. Using realistic assumptions, there's no point in saying that it's going to change in the very short term if we're reliably informed that it's not. So, being honest and getting it down. And as always, it's very much case by case. Okay, so no two farms are going to be the same, and the banks will have to understand what's happening on the farm and what suits the borrower, the farmer, at the end of it. Look, there's a lot of detail here. I'm not going to go through it. The slides will be up, but for any application in a banking process, look, most here will have a long-standing relationship with their bank or credit union. They'll have a lot of the information on you, but you're looking at your application forms and you're looking at bank statements and looking at security and the bits and pieces. Just number 8 there, the outside professional advice. Do seek assistance from people. Do talk to others. See what's happening. Not everything will be applicable to your farm, but what are your options? And as I said, it's very important to recognize that, look, one farmer on his or her own cannot fix this in the short term. So it's important to recognize that this is, obviously an industry wide, and people need to look after themselves. But a key summary is certainly accurate, up-to-date farm data. Certainly from my time in Ulster Bank, that was your key starting point. What are your feed costs? What are your non-feed costs? At which point will you start to break even? What are the most pertinent costs that are there? You want to look after animals, obviously, from a welfare point of view. You need to keep the electricity and the bits on. So it's really having that open and honest conversation. Cash flows, as I said, are essential. There's great tools at your availability there from Teagasc, and just having an accurate, honest cash flow. And as I said, for the next 6 to 12 months is really what you're looking at. What a bank wants to see is repayment capacity. If you're borrowing X amount, can you afford to pay it back? And there might be blends to that. As I said, there might be different sources and uses. Seek trustworthy assistance, but first and foremost, I'd encourage everyone to look after themselves and to take care, because certainly it is an extremely challenging time, and it's very important that somebody has support, obviously financial, but also on the personal side. Thanks, Gerard.
Thank you, Anne Marie. That was excellent briefing as well. So what we're going to do now is come to the Q&A. So I can again remind you, put in your questions there through the Q&A option at the bottom. But firstly, before we move on to that, I'd like just to welcome again Pat Byrnes from Bank of Ireland and Donal Whelton from AIB. So I may just ask you lads first if you want to just give a couple of minute overview of what you're seeing on the ground, what your current situation is, and the offerings that are most are in discussion, I suppose, with your client farmers. So Pat, if you want to start there, and then we'll move to Donal.
Okay, thanks very much, Kieran. I suppose just firstly, on behalf of Bank of Ireland, I just want to stress that this sector is very important to the bank, and to acknowledge, as Anne Marie has mentioned again, like it's very stressful time for a lot of farmers on the call today. So we're very conscious of that, and we want to try and support them. Like in Bank of Ireland, we've been engaging with all the stakeholders since last autumn. We have had meetings with Teagasc, the merchants, the farming organisations, the Department of Ag, and the Minister. And we also then initiated a call-out programme to our pig farmers. And I suppose really that kind of highlighted for us, there are probably 3 groups of pig farmers out there at the moment. Some pig farmers have cash reserves, while they're very concerned about the figures that we see today. They have no immediate financial requirement from us. The second group then have no cash reserves and definitely need support. And the third group would be the farmers that Anne Marie mentioned again, maybe have spent money on their units up in 2019 and 2020 in particular, funded from their own reserves, and they need support now. So how are we then as a bank trying to support pig farmers? It's very much on a case-by-case basis. We're asking the customer to make contact with us as soon as possible and to engage with us as soon as possible. We need to understand the extent of the cash flow requirements. So with that, again, as Anne Marie mentioned, like the cash flow for the next 12 months, that cash flow projection is very, very important. I'd be suggesting pig farmers link in with Teagasc or an agri consultant or whoever, somebody that will be familiar with the sector and know the issues that are there in terms of trying to project as best as we can. The thing is changing all the time, as Michael mentioned earlier. the profit monitor data from Teagasc, the age listing of creditors, the financial accounts, and we're trying to establish as well how much capital expenditure was funded from cash flow in recent years, because as Anne Marie said, we can maybe look at retrospectively fund that over a period of time. The solutions again will vary from case to case. Historically, like, it might have been increased in overdraft or extra working capital, but that's not a solution probably for a lot of farmers, because the problem is so great. Like, the Brexit impact loan scheme definitely is a one that we've seen to be used. The big benefit is, like, as Sean called out, farmers can borrow up to 500 without seeking additional security. The other part of it then would be for existing customers that have security with the bank, and they've funded some of this capital expenditure from cash flow. Maybe it's a 10-year loan that we'd be able to give them in certain instances. So just finally, just from my perspective, would be, look, it's a challenging time for everybody in the industry. We need to all work together. Get good advice would be the message. Engage as soon as possible with us, and link in with Teagasc if you want support on the cash flow projections, because I know you're very willing to support there. Thanks, Kieran.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Pat. Thank you, Donal. Do you want to have a few words there? Yeah.
Thanks, Kieran, and thanks very much for the invitation to join the webinar this afternoon, and good afternoon to everybody. And very similar to the key messages from Pat, EIB, we have a very similar position. Look, we recognise the challenges in this sector, and it's obviously very sobering, as Anne Marie said, to hear the data and see the data actually that Michal and Gerard has presented this afternoon. But I think from EIB's point of view, we've been here before in supporting the sector, albeit we do recognise the scale and the pace of the deterioration in margins is unprecedented over the last 30 years. And it's really is a case of so much support that EIB can offer now to our pig farmer customers, and recognise that we're fully aware of the support that we need to provide our customers in light of the negative margins that are currently in the sector, and the part that we have to play to support our agri customers. Similar to what Pat said, we're very much of the view that there's no one solution will suit every pig customer. That's why, as Anne Marie pointed out, that there's a range of options available. Sean mentioned in detail the 2 SBCI products. As Pat said, also we're finding them very popular with regard to our pig farming customers, because of the speed to cash, given the unsecured element, and also the built-in attractive features with regard to interest rate. And also there's interest-only options that are available in those 2 products that Sean mentioned. But they're one part of the solution. EIB, we have our own farmer credit line products, which is a line of credit for a 12-month facility. There's the interest-only option, and again also the retrospectively funding of capex. And when we've been engaging with our farming customers, we have found that particularly in 19 and 20, when margins were relatively strong, that a lot of farmers would have spent a lot of their cash flow out of capex, and it is an option to retrospectively fund that and go out for maybe a longer period, as Pat mentioned, maybe 10 or 15 years for that, as opposed to the SBCI products, you're maybe somewhere limited with maybe 5.5 and 6 year funds. So there is the option to do longer term funding. I do say, and Anne Marie mentioned it in her presentation, the option of interest only. Again, that is an option. I suppose what we find is that the current crisis is so significant now that interest only doesn't give you the immediate cash injection that farmers need for their business right now that they need it. The cash benefits of interest only really become apparent in maybe a 6 or 9 or 12 months time. And it is an option. It's an option that farmers talk to us about. And again, I think this is the importance of early engagement with the banks, because again, for us, I don't think the real benefit of interest only, going on interest only, is maybe not the appropriate solution for a lot of farmers, because you don't get that cash injection that farmers actually need right now into their business. I suppose maybe 2 messages, and again, it's to reiterate what Pat says. Come and talk to us as early as possible. We also have engaged with our pig farmers over the last number of months. That being said, customers that we would have engaged with maybe last October, November, the situation probably has deteriorated faster and more aggressive than we would have envisaged. Obviously, we would encourage those customers, if you anticipate now experience cash flow pressure, you might have cash reserves that you thought you would see you through last October, November. We know that they're being burnt and going through in a fairly significant rate because of the figures that Michael put up in his slide. Come and talk to us again, because obviously the situation has deteriorated more so and quicker than we would have anticipated if we were talking to you last October and November. And also then very, very importantly, and again, Anne Marie touched on it, when you're coming and talk to us, try to quantify the level of support that you need, because I suppose from a banking point of view, we want to, insofar as possible, put the right amount of support in place for you and your business at the first time of asking, not to be doing it at a piecemeal basis. So that is the benefit of a cash flow projection, and that allows, or that shows the bank exactly the amount of support that you need for your business until hopefully margins will recover, as Michael has maybe projected there, in maybe hopefully early Q4 of this year. So I suppose to conclude, look, we recognise the challenges are in the sector. It's unprecedented that I have seen in my career. I'm in the bank 20 plus years, and I haven't seen the scale of deterioration and the pace of it so quickly. But we fully recognise the part that we have to play in supporting the sector. It's an industry-wide response that's needed, but we're ready here to play our part in supporting our pig farmers over the next number of months. Thanks, Kieran.
Thanks, Donald. Thanks very much. Great to see the bank's commitment to the sector and realisation of its value, I suppose, and its commitment to work with you going forward. Just on that lowest ever, Gerard, I'll go back to the start and work our way through some of the speakers, some of the questions that we've come in there. Gerard, have we seen margin over feeds as low as this in the past? Or?
Back in January 1999, but it only lasted, let's say, January and February. It didn't linger through the year. The big fear at the moment is that what's happening, let's say, in January of 2022, that will linger throughout the year, because feed prices, we don't know which way they're going. And from what Michael is presenting there, all the indications are that they're looking high for the year. So, okay. Unfortunately, let's say in 1999, the margin over feed for that year was 26 cents. I don't know whether we'll see that this year or not.
Yeah. There was one question there, Gerard, on the access to the data, the feed data and stuff that you were talking about. That's from the monthly monitor, is it? Is that correct?
That's from the monthly monitor, and we can make that available, let's say, after the presentation.
Perfect.
It'll be up on the website, yeah.
Okay. Grand. Just moving on, and move on, Sean. Michael, I have a couple of questions for you, but I'll throw them at the end. There'll be more to do with markets and things like that. Sean, the terms you mentioned there from 2 to 5 years or things like that, or 1 to 5 years, I think it might have been. That's not set by SBCI, or is it? No. You just give the approval and it's up to the banks afterwards?
So the scheme provides, Kieran, for funding from between 1 and 5.5 years in the case of the COVID Credit Guarantee Scheme, and up to 6 years in the case of the bill scheme. And they're the terms within which an approval can be provided. So the bank then completes the analysis of the customer requirements. The only point I would make is that in terms of the interest rates that are applicable, they're variable interest rates. So if a loan gets repaid early, as is often the case, there shouldn't be any penalty for an early repayment. But the point that Pat makes is valid around putting the appropriate term for the purpose, and funding feed costs, for example, over very long periods of time when it's a current input isn't something that you would normally see, but these are unprecedented times. So it's about trying to fit to support the cash flow as necessary, and the schemes provide for up to those terms. Okay.
Perfect, thanks. And just in terms of the logistics of getting your application online, is it a detail? Does it take long to do, or is assistance needed? Is it something very straightforward that you could manage in your own time in a short while?
Well, look, when you're trying to comply with something that the EU Commission designed, it's never that straightforward. So there was quite a lot of work in the setup of the COVID Credit Guarantee Scheme in conjunction with colleagues of Pat and Donal's in EIB and Bank of Ireland and the other providers that I put up on the screen, and they manage that, and they might, either Pat or Donal might want to speak to that COVID-19 guarantee scheme process. It is typically done online, and it's fairly straightforward. In terms of the Brexit impact loan scheme, which is possibly the most applicable, that eligibility application form with the SBCI should take no more than 10 minutes to fill out, and then you send that back to us. And then we provide you with a code, and you bring that code to any of the participating non-lenders. And then the credit assessment is done at the bank level. So the initial eligibility piece is pretty straightforward.
Okay, very good. So Pat and Donal, I'll give both of you an opportunity. Your experience with the SBCI thing, and in particular around, Pat, you referred to terms and things like that. You know, how do you look at it in terms of the terms of what's the appropriate term? And kind of a second part of that then would be looking at the whole area. I've lost the question now. Sorry about that. On the terms, sorry, yeah, from the approval, we say the code. The farmer arrives to you with the code. And how long, or what's the average time from that to approval from the bank?
Yeah, I suppose first of all, on the term, Kieran, we say take the Brexit impact loan scheme, maximum term is 6 years, as Sean has called out. So we can't go longer than that under that loan option. But obviously then it could be a mix, like it could be some of the debt on a 6-year loan and some of it on maybe a 1 to 2 year period, because of the point, you know, if we're funding all of the feed bill over the next 6 years and hopefully things return to profitability in the short to medium term, you don't want debt out there again for the next downturn. You're trying to manage that piece as best you can also. In terms of the turnaround time, again, like from the time we get the application in and have all the data, typically I would say, you know, within a week to 10 days, like, you know, from the time we have all the information. But the one thing I'm seeing is like that, you know, farmers, you know, and I spoke to some colleagues on this, like some farmers have put it to us like, well, sure, why do you need the cash flow and that? But it's going back to the point that both Donal and Anne Marie made again, like we need to understand the level of support that's required. That's why the cash flow is so important. And, you know, I think that's a starting point. You know, oftentimes it's taking time to get those few items to us, Kieran. Like, so if a farmer reckons they're okay today, cash flow wise, they still have a reserve, but they need support in a month or 6 weeks time, I would say they should be acting now in terms of, you know, going to yourselves or whoever to complete the cash flow projection for the next 12 months, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Donal?
Yeah, and just a comment on that in relation, maybe like no different to what Pat said in terms of the term and a combination of options, and Sean touched on it as well. Like obviously putting short-term input costs over longer term may not be appropriate, but again, it's looking at every case on a case-by-case basis, and these are exceptional times. And obviously, any financial institution will look at a range of options that we can be supported, whether it's 12 months for some support, whether it's 3 to 5 to 6 years, we're using the SBCI, or obviously longer terms using our own products. Maybe in terms of the application process and the eligibility criteria for the 2 SBCI products that Sean mentioned about, I suppose at this stage, I think the SBCI came to the market, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, was about 2015 and 2016, and both EIB and the Bank of Ireland, we've all both put up our hands to avail of any products that come through the SBCI every year since then, whether it's credit guarantee scheme, Brexit impact loan scheme. There's been a number of future growth loan scheme products as well, and each of those products required an eligibility criteria or an online self-certification to be done through the SBCI. And initially at the start, obviously 2015, 2016, there was a learning process. Obviously, we have found the SBCI products very, very popular with our agri customers because of the attractive features. So I think at this stage here now, 2022, because we have 4 or 5 or 6 years of SBCI products, where for each of them there's either been self-declaration or eligibility criteria that a farmer has applied with. They're much more streamlined, and they're much more comfortable, and they're much more confident now of filling out those data, of filling out the requirements in the SBCI and bringing those eligibility codes or self-declaration to the bank. And obviously no different to Pat, once we have that from the SBCI and the eligibility codes, we can process similar timeframes as Pat outlined. You know.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Donal. That's very good. Michael, just a couple of queries here on feed credit and feed credit issues. I know we had made some recoveries over 1920 where farms were making money and started eating into their compounder credit. Would you just make a comment on that and the impact it has on the farms, but also, I suppose, importantly as well, on the mills?
Yeah, I suppose feed credit, there was 2 relatively good years in pig production there from a margin point of view from 2019 to 2020, but unfortunately a lot of that money was used to pay down the feed credit that had gone out from 2017 and 2018. So the average in feed credit there had been nearly up to 4 months. It probably was pulled back in by 3 to 4 weeks, which is for an average unit 150,000 up to 200,000. So after profit that they would have made in 2019, 2020, a lot of that went back into paying down the feed credit. So therefore, from a current account point of view, it's not as strong as the profitability of those years would have suggested. And it's not because it was spent on expansion or something. It was simply, it was paying down debt. So from that point of view, I suppose the industry is in a little bit of a healthier position. But going forward, like it's like I'm not sure what's going to happen to the feed credit. If you take it at a national level, and you looked at February 2021 versus now, and the composite cost of feed has gone from €314 a ton last February to 393 euros a ton now. The increase in feed credit for the mills, from a milling point of view, has gone from about 58 million up to 70 million. So it's an increase of 12 million. And remember, this is for mills. There's probably 4 or 5 main mills who have to carry the increase. And if feed prices go up again in April by another 30 euros a ton, that will increase the amount of feed credit by another 8.5 million, irrespective, even with the same payment terms. So feed credit is a massive issue. Just the escalation of feed ingredient cost here is massive. If the feed goes up in April, the feed itself will have gone up by over 33% in the space of a little over 15 months. You know, so it's a massive issue.
Absolutely. And the other thing, Michael, you might just comment on there is the backlog of pigs getting to the factory and the impact that that's having, or has had and is having, continuing to have.
Yeah, so the Irish herd, we would have always sent about 12% for pigs up to Northern Ireland for slaughtering. There was an issue up in the plant up in Northern Ireland that simply wasn't taking as many pigs there from about July onwards. So for the second half of the year, we sent up about 18,500 pigs less than we had in the first half of the year. And then since Christmas there's a backlog of about a further 10,000 pigs. So there's about 28,000 pigs there that should have gone north, that haven't gone north there at the moment and are sitting on units. And it's sitting on units, and this causes massive problems, both in feeding cost. So where you had a pig that was being sold at 120 kilos, he's now 140 kilos. So from a feed point of view, you're feeding him probably an extra 25 to 30 kilos. For the extra weight there, it's about 75 kilos extra, which is about 30 to 40 euros a pig. So you're feeding the pig more, and because the pig now is overweight, he's now is discounted. So instead of getting your 142 a kilo, you could be getting 132, 133 a kilo, and you're building up stocks as well. So from a whole range of issues, that's adding to the cash flow issues that are on units there at the moment. And like, we're not ones in the ground of say exaggeration, but like if you look at the industry as a whole, you would have to say that there's probably 25 to 45% of the industry is at serious risk. So if you take it as a €1 billion industry, there's 500 million there at risk at the moment. Or if you take from an export point of view, there's 250 million to 300 million there at risk of being lost as we stand at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Anne Marie, just a final couple towards yourself. I suppose an excellent presentation in terms of informing farmers what they'll need when they go to meet the bank. In your experience, and I know you've moved on now to bigger and better things with Teagasc here. What in your experience, and the lads can comment as well, what's the main issue with data not being provided, or that farmers aren't coming in with on time? I suppose, look, the take-home message from all of you is get in there early, talk to the banks early. But what are the key things that people arrive in without that really slows up the process?
Yeah, well, it's mainly the cash flow and asking for that cash flow, and then I suppose the time lag that happens, and then going back to get the cash flow made up. And to be fair, Kieran, like often people will reach far to get help with it, but really a lot of that help is at hand with their advisor. Like, to be fair, over the years, Michael McKeon always was excellent to get data into me, and it had all the information you needed. It needed the price of feed, it needed the costs. So that's the big one. And the other one is really, I suppose, as the lad said, is talking to the bank early, but being able to quantify what you need, because as Donal said, that the last thing you want to do is to arrange finance for somebody, and then 2 weeks later they have to come back and say, look, we're still in bother. And look, that can happen, but you really want to try and fix it right from the start. And it's putting everything out on the table. It's including all the bits and pieces and trying to have it right, but certainly have that conversation early.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that there, lads? Pat or Donal?
Yeah.
No. Donal, here go.
Sorry, Kieran, I suppose the key message for us, and again, it was touched on, like for the vast majority of customers, this is going to be a short-term liquidity issue. And we need to quantify, as Anne Marie says, that the level of support that is needed until margins improve and they're back into a break even at the start, and then obviously, hopefully, profitability, hopefully Q1 next year. But it would be remiss of any bank not, when we're assessing cash flow support for a customer, to determine whether it is a short-term liquidity issue. And for the vast majority of our customers, we fully expect and project that it will be. But for some customers, it could be a long-term profitability issue. And I think Anne Marie might have touched on that point also. So again, for that customer, when they're engaging with their external accountant or advisor or Teagasc, just to determine themselves whether it's short-term liquidity that they need, or is the symptom of their problem a longer-term profitability issue, because that's the first thing a bank is going to require. Fully recognising for the vast majority of our customers, this is a short-term liquidity issue.
Okay, Pat?
Yeah, no, I just echo what Donal has said, really, Kieran. I'd say, really, again, accurate, cash flow, again, for the farmer themselves, I suppose, look, it's very stressful. Like, maybe some farmers don't want to, go near cash flows at the moment because it's so stressful. But by maybe putting it down on paper, talking to the likes of yourselves, and that it can help. A problem shared is often a problem halved, as they say. And, at least then if the bank knows the extent of the issue, we can look at different options for them.
Yeah, great. Lovely. Listen, I'll finish up on that. I think that's a key note to finish on, is for people to look after themselves and talk to your advisors, talk to a neighbour, talk to whoever, family, get the help and get the direction that you need, because look, it is a very stressful time. It's like nothing we've seen in 30 years. So do get the help and support, and Pat said it, a problem shared is a problem halved. I would like to thank our speakers today. Thanks Gerard and Michael here, and Anne Marie from the Teagasc side, to Sean Farrell from SBCI, really appreciate your time, and to Pat Byrnes and Donal Whelton, really appreciate your time as well. There was plenty of information there for everyone. And look, I said it at the outset, it's going to be a combined effort from ourselves, the mills, the banks, SBCI and so on, that will get us through this storm. The Teagasc advisors are on hand. Their details, contact details. Anybody's having difficulty with getting through with any of us, just contact myself here directly in Moore Park. You'll find all our details on our website anyway. But do come and talk to us, and we'll get you ready and try and help you through this situation, as will all the people that have spoken here already again today. So appreciate your time given at this lunchtime webinar, and appreciate your attendance. And look, we look forward to working with you in the course of the 12 months and get us through and Bjorn and this time next year. Thank you very much.